want to see.
My name's Catherine, and I'm a PhD student in the economics department here. And I'm just here to introduce our panelists and to facilitate the question and answer section and to provide a constant reminder of the gender disparity of our field. And, I'm just going to introduce the panelists all at once at first, both to cut the suspense and to ensure that our presentations flow really smoothly because they're actually really well connected. Dr. Thomas Pali is going to start. He's an economist. He lives in Washington, D.C., and he studied at Oxford and then at Yale, got an MA in International Relations and a PhD in economics. He's published both in academic journals and in publications that people who aren't economists can read, like the Atlantic Monthly, the American Prospect, and The Nation. He's currently a Schwartz Economic Growth Fellow with the New America Foundation, and he was formerly chief economist with the U.S.-China Economic and Security Review Commission. And before that, he was the director of the Open Society Institute's Globalization Reform Project. And before that, he was the assistant director of public policy at the AFL-CIO. He's authored books including Plenty of Nothing, The Downsizing of the American Dream, and The Case for Structural Keynesianism, and Post-Keynesian Economics. And you can find numerous op-eds from Dr. Pali on his website at thomaspali.com. Ed Wolf's going to speak next. He's a professor in the Department of Economics at NYU. He's also a senior scholar at the Jerome Levy Institute, an associate editor of Structural Change and Economic Dynamics, a research associate at the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the past managing editor of the Review of Income and Wealth. Dr. Wolf's written extensively about U.S. economic policy, especially in terms of the distribution of income. And his publications include the book entitled Top Heavy, A Study of Increasing Inequality and Wealth in America. Today, he's going to discuss the changing constitution of the middle class over the last 35 years in the United States. Ajit Zacharias will speak next. His research focuses on measures of economic well-being and the outcomes of economic policies, including the disparities among class, gender, and age categories. His work on the Levy measure of economic well-being provides an alternative measure for the evaluation of welfare that includes income distribution as an essential component. Zacharias is a senior scholar at the Levy Institute in Economics Institute of Bard College, and he'll discuss the impact of Obama's stimulus package on employment and income inequality today. And then finally, Matthew Forstater, who is sitting inconspicuously in the front row, is a professor of economics and black studies at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. His research includes ecological economics, black political economy, the history of economic thought, and employment policy. He's the author of The Little Book of Big Ideas, recently published in Estonian, Dutch, and Swedish translations. And he wrote his 1996 New School doctoral dissertation on Adolf Loh's methodology of public policy under Robert Hallbreiner's supervision. Today he's going to talk about the effects of the current recession on racial, social, and economic inequality. So thank you all for coming. Oh, and I'm going to wave these little cards around when your time is nearing its end.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I think what I'm going to say is actually going to fit quite nicely what I think was said this morning, and I think is going to be said after me. So I hope this helps you understand. It's widely agreed that the current crisis is tied to the bursting of the house bubble and the debts accumulated in financing that bubble. And as a result, quite naturally, a lot of commentary, in fact most commentary, has focused on market failure in housing markets and financial markets. But today I want to ask the question, what if the economy needed a bubble to ensure growth and full employment? In that case, the real deep causes of the bubble and the crisis would be the macroeconomic structure of the economy. And a focus on market failures, like we are currently having in public policy debate, would completely miss that. I'm going to argue that the crisis, the roots of the crisis, are a flawed U.S. macroeconomic paradigm that was adopted around 1980 and is actually described in my book, if I can plug it, Plenty of Nothing. And the paradigm was flawed in two dimensions. The first concerned the growth model that was adopted over the last 30 years, and the second concerns the flawed model of U.S. global economic engagement that has been pursued over the last 30 years. I'm going to argue that I believe these macroeconomic forces have been brewing for many years, and they made for an increasingly fragile and unstable environment. In fact, I would say that the evidence was incredibly obvious in all the sort of repeated stock market price bubbles, trade deficits rising as a percentage of GDP, the debt to GDP ratios, debt service to GDP ratios, house prices, across the board, is incredibly obvious in retrospect. But society and policymakers kind of got caught up together in an unstable exuberance. And of course then there were also, as usual, political and ideological reasons blocking change. And the winners under the paradigm that was adopted did not want to change, and by the way, they still do not want to change. And that's part of the problem we confront. As you look to the future, I think the danger now is not that we're going to have another financial crisis. You can sort of Mark Twain here, history does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. I think the danger is that we're going to get trapped in a very extended period of stagnation that will cheat working families of participating in shared prosperity. And the outline of my talk is to kind of go through these two lines here, explain the two dimensions of the flawed paradigm, how it came together and caused the crisis, and very briefly at the end, what the outlook is. So, the blow-up of the subprime market in August 2007 can be viewed as the detonator that triggered the crisis. Policy failures, like the failure to prevent the collapse of Lehman Brothers, have worsened the crisis. But the real bedrock of the crisis lies in the flawed macroeconomic paradigm that the US has followed. The roots of that paradigm trace back to the late 1970s and early 1980s that saw the triumph of neoliberal economics. At that time, we put in place a new growth model that created a new business cycle. The old, what I call the post-World War II growth model, was based on two pillars: full employment and a system in which wages were tied to productivity growth, the so-called Treaty of Detroit model. That created a virtuous circle of growth. The economic logic was that wage growth was tied to productivity growth, which meant robust aggregate demand. Robust aggregate demand contributed to full employment. Full employment provided an incentive to invest, and investment then raised productivity, allowing further growth of wages. It was a complete, closed, working circle. After 1980, we created a new growth model that was marked by two things. First, a retreat from commitment to full employment, and second, a severing of the link between productivity growth and wages. And in place of this earlier virtuous circle model, we created a new growth model based on debt and asset price inflation, so that borrowing and rising asset prices became the engine of aggregate demand instead of wages. Now, the foundation of this new model was financial boom and cheap imports. Financial boom provides consumers and firms with the collateral to support debt finance spending. Additionally, borrowing was supported by financial innovation and financial deregulation, which ensured a flow of new financial products, allowing increased leverage and widening the range of assets that can be collateralized. On the other side, there was cheap imports, which basically served to ameliorate the impact of wage stagnation, widening income inequality, increased economic insecurity. That is what kept political support in place for this thing. That's the dirty secret of Walmart's everyday low prices. Keeps political support in place. Now, these features, I would say, were present in all the business cycles after 1980. The business cycles of Ronald Reagan, of Bush 1, Clinton, Bush 2. They all share remarkably similar features, which, by the way, goes to show that this is a bipartisan project. This is very important and part of the political obstruction to change as we try and put in place a new economic paradigm. One place where the common feature is evident is the change in manufacturing employment. If you look before 1980, each business cycle, manufacturing employment rises to a new peak. It's as if we're scaling upwards the mountain. After 1980, each business cycle, manufacturing employment no longer recovers the peak of the prior business cycle. And indeed, in the last two business cycles, the business cycles of Bill Clinton and George Bush, manufacturing employment actually fell over the course of the cycle, which is a complete break with everything we've known in US economic history before. The change is also evident in the policy attitude towards the trade deficit. Pre-1980, we ran roughly balanced trade, and trade deficits were viewed as a problem because they were seen as a leakage of aggregate demand. After 1980, what we see is massively rising